Me and a friend at the time were hiking in the Angeles National Forest. My friend was just at a boot camp, U.S.A, and we started hiking as often time would allow. We were hiking down a small stream bed that went downhill. The stream was all dried up, and it was mostly rock hopping until we got to the bottom of the hill. At one point, there is a small section off to the side that is just dirt and makes for a much easier walk down to the bottom. When we got to the bottom, we hiked a bit more, but as the sun started to go down, we headed back up the same hill creek bed. I followed my own boot tracks back up, as I was tired of rock hopping while going up. The smell in the air was horrible, like rotten eggs or a portable toilet. I then noticed on one of my tracks laid a dead ground squirrel, right over my boot track. I pointed this out to my friend, and as soon as I did, a loud banging over a short hillside was heard. It was coming from about 35 to 50 yards away from us. It sounded as if a large log was being hit against a tree. I looked at where the noise was coming from and noticed the tops of the trees were swaying back and forth. All this time of the swaying of the trees, the pounding on them could be heard. Then the pounding stopped, and a loud groan scream was heard from the same area as the pounding of the trees. I have never heard anything like it. I've heard mountain lions, black bear. This was nothing like that, and was very, very loud, to the point that where it was damn scary. My friend asked if we should go look over the small hillside to see what was making the noise. I said no way, and he agreed. When we started walking away, the banging and the screaming would stop, but as soon as we stopped, it would then proceed with the groan and screaming, and the trees would start swaying. We finally got out of there, and my friend did not want to talk about what happened. This is what you might call a stretch, but here goes anyway. About 15 years ago, when I was 17 or 18, I went on a hike with a friend trying to reach Smith Mountain on the edge of the San Gabriel Wilderness. We made it up to the saddle where the trail goes downhill into the wilderness and where we were supposed to leave the trail and go south of the mountain, and decided we didn't feel like going any further. I'm assuming we rested for a while, and I remember just talking and hanging out. As we were getting up and ready to go, we heard a strange noise coming from the bushes nearby. We stopped talking and listened, and it was a very low sort of growl, snuffling sound. My first thought was that it was probably a bear, but that ultimately I had no idea what it was, and it sounded like it was growling at us. The bushes along the trail were very high, such so that we couldn't see through them. It scared the hell out of us, and so we quickly hoofed it back down the trail. I'm not sure if we ever spoke about it again, except to maybe say I wonder what it was, that it was scary. But afterwards, I actually looked through the field guides trying to figure out what was making the noise. I knew that bears, mountain lions, and bobcats all relatively are prevalent in that part of San Gabriel Mountains, so assumed it was probably one of those. But after browsing around and seeing several sightings near that wilderness area, I'm beginning to wonder. In retrospect, although it could be my overactive imagination, it sounded a bit ape-like, very low-pitched, so that we almost couldn't hear it at all, and we had to ask each other, "Do you hear that?" Take it as you must. I just think it's interesting in the context of the other sightings. I only wish I could remember any more details, and that we had the cojones to hang around longer and to check it out further. In 1976, while night hunting for bobcats on the fringe of San Gabriel Wilderness, I called in a Bigfoot while using a dying rabbit call. I heard it scream so loud that the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I got goosebumps all over my whole body. I've been hunting now for 34 years, and besides hunting 8 of the 11 western states, I've also hunted deep in the interior of Mexico, and I have never heard anything like that before. It was the only time I have ever been truly frightened. Even though I had a high-powered rifle, I knew by the sheer volume of the blood-curdling scream that whatever it was too big to kill with my .243 caliber bullet. It sounded like it was mad at me and kept moving to my right, trying to get downwind of me. I figured that my very powerful aircraft landing light that I was using to hunt with must have blinded him and hurt his eyes, because he was circling me, trying to win me. He never looked my way, thus allowing me to catch his glowing eyes. This is the first of 3 so-called sightings. Me and my fishing buddy, Greg, were fishing the backside of Morris Dam, knocking stuff out of smallmouth bass and an occasional huge trout or crappie. It's not legal to trespass there, so we were very quiet and did not use lights. We are one with nature, so to speak. At around 4 a.m, we started back to the car, a quarter-mile walk through dense brush, across the river, up to waist deep. We used deer trails, like tunnels, to get through the thick brush. We grabbed our hefty stringer, no fish story, and headed into the bush, without really speaking. We knew the routine well. About 50 yards into the bush, Greg and I both noticed that someone, a human, was walking in front of us, about 20 feet ahead. We both stopped. The footsteps took 2 more steps, and then stopped. Greg and I looked at each other, surprised, and simultaneously drew our buck knives. We couldn't see anything. We proceeded cautiously, our knives drawn. The footsteps continued in front of us. After about 30 feet, we came to the edge of a clearing and stopped. 2 more steps, and it stopped again, only this time in the middle of the clearing. We looked at each other, looked back at it, and simultaneously said, "Who's there?" It turned 90 degrees up the river and took off running through dense brush in the black of night, like a halfback for the Rams, like no human can. This early 1970s sighting was not of my own. I was a boy when my brother-in-law of that day and 1 or 2 of his hunting friends had an excellent and fairly long-term sighting, both via their eyes through high-powered rifle scopes. However, I can relate some of this information to you. In fact, I spoke with my ex-brother-in-law about this earlier this evening because I happened upon it and wanted to explore this encounter. What is very significant is that Sam and Dawn had every opportunity to shoot this animal or person and thought about it, but could not because it looked too human. Only 3 days later, Bigfoot reports hit the news. My father and Sam, aka Sandy, in front of me, took out a forest map, and Sam became quiet as the new sightings were only 15 miles from his encounter, and in the direction the creature was traveling. The newer sightings, as I recall, put the creature near Pear Blossom, on the other side of the mountains. I remember a news report of 1,000 people lined up across the desert looking for anything, and they did find some hair on a barbed wire fence. To this day, I know of no one having reported this first encounter 3 days prior. Another significant item is that in those days, bear season and deer season overlapped, or was one and the same. At first, they thought this might be a deformed bear. They had bear tags, as they witnessed this being walking on 2 legs, just like any human, and appeared to be around 8 feet tall. They were a few hundred yards away on the other side of the canyon. I don't remember the name of the canyon, but the rifle scopes allowed them to see this clearly enough that viewing the face and shape, they could not decide if this was an animal or a human. I remember Sandy, or Sam, saying it looked kind of like a monkey man. The animal person seemingly did not know they were there. They had bear tags and thought about shooting the creature, but as I said, could not make themselves to do it. I recall Sam telling my father that it had to be a bear because it dropped down to all fours when it climbed the steeper terrain. My father asked Sam, "How did you guys climb it?" The reply was the same as a deformed bear. About then, my brother-in-law was no longer jovial regarding the sighting and preferred not to discuss the incident. Until now, I have more or less left the man alone about it. Today, he is a plant manager for a large trailer company. Dawn still lives in Baldwin Park, California, but may be moving to San Diego. I seldom cross paths with Dawn, nor have I ever pursued the matter with him. If anybody is interested. I was mining on the creek when some movement caught my eye. As I stood up, I saw clear as day a Bigfoot peering from behind a tree. The hair on my neck stood straight up on the back of my neck as I moved back towards across the creek, away from it. As I did, I slipped on mossy rocks, fell back, and banged my arm up pretty bad, which required medical attention later on, keeping a close eye on what it was doing. I knew exactly what I saw, as well as it saw me. We were talking about a distance of 60 yards. My mining partner was upstream from us, and it knew that too, as he kept looking upstream looking for him. My friend must have spooked it my way. As it spotted me, already acting nervous, it leapt up and climbed over some rocks and was gone. As it knew to stay low, like it was in firefight, staying as much out of sight as possible. In panic and injured, I was heading up the trail as fast as I could. The behavior I observed was so fascinating that this thing was very tactful and knew exactly what it was doing. Quite the sure-footed creature.